Rakib Sanders here. Rakib, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike. How are you?
Yeah, not bad at all. So, I mean, let's talk about international affairs. I mean, I still can't... You sort of pinch me to tell me that David Lammy is the Foreign Secretary of this country. There's pictures of him going off to Washington, D.C., very nicely dressed in a suit, very nicely dressed in a shirt and tie, wearing a pair of trainers. I've got nothing against trainers, right? But if you're wearing a suit, wear some proper bloody shoes, will you? Yeah,
it shouldn't be very difficult, should it, to wear some smart shoes with a decent suit as well.
It really shouldn't.
But I think the worry for me, Mike, is actually I think that's just some of the language being used by the likes of Lammy.
There he is, check the shoes out. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, in relation to Russia, Ukraine, I think it's somewhat reckless.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say that we should pander to Russia and Putin, absolutely not.
No.
But I think that we require careful and thoughtful diplomacy.
Definitely.
And at the moment, we're not quite seeing that.
They've only been in for 2 months, right? So don't start pushing your weight around. I mean, Britain is not the country that it was. You know, yes, we're a major contributor to NATO. Yes, we're a very important part of NATO. But, you know, do not go to America and start ordering Vladimir Putin around. It's just not a very smart thing to do, is it?
No, absolutely. I think it's a very gung-ho approach to international diplomacy. I think that the Labour government, what they could have done is just ease themselves in a little bit, more than anything. But I think that as it stands, I feel that there's been a great deal of reckless governance. I'm sure
they love it, though, don't they? I mean, they love two things, the Labour Party. They love a nanny state, which we'll talk about in a minute.
Absolutely.
They also love to stride around the world, because we're told that as soon as he's left Washington, D.C., Starmer's going to go over to see Giorgia Meloni in Italy to see if we can get some kind of similar deal to deal with the migrants as they've done.
No, I think that visit, there's a purpose to that, for sure. I think at the moment immigration and asylum generally is not working very well in the UK, and the government has to find innovative and creative ways to solve that. But I think that more generally in terms of Russia, Ukraine, I think most people, what they want to see more than anything is a peaceful settlement as opposed to a ramping up of the language.
Right. Well, the first thing that we can say about the front page of the Times, for example, President Putin has warned Britain and the US that they will be at war with Russia if they allow Ukraine to use long-range missiles to strike targets. Now, I don't think for a minute that Vladimir Putin wants to have a war with NATO. I don't think he wants to have a full-scale kind of, you know, tit-for-tat, let's bomb each other kind of war. However, you know, it's a very fine line that these guys are treading, and I don't think they understand the language. I don't think they understand the job that they've got to do.
No, absolutely. And I think it's about these Storm Shadow missiles.
Yes.
And I think that Putin has issued warnings if these long-range missiles were to be used by Ukraine to strike targets in Russia. And as you say, Mike, there is a very fine line here. Now, of course, I don't think Putin wants a direct confrontation with NATO.
No.
Now, I think that the US and the UK, they were right to provide Ukraine with logistical support.
Yeah.
But now there's a debate in terms of, are we really getting bang for our buck on that front? And to what extent does the American and indeed British public, how do they feel about those vast amounts of public expenditure?
Well, we know for a fact that, you know, when David Lammy and Keir Starmer promised another 600 million to Ukraine, and Lammy came out when he went over there with Secretary of State Blinken to say, basically, you know, we will stand by Ukraine for however long it takes. Well, a lot of people in this country go, well, sorry, you keep telling us there's a black hole, you keep telling us there's no money, you keep telling us, you know, we have to take money away from pensioners, but you're giving money hand over fist to a foreign country who have been invaded by another foreign country. What's it going to do with us?
No, absolutely. And I think that many people will want to see more domestic issues being prioritised in terms of public expenditure.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, I think that many voters, they ultimately see things as trade-offs. They see huge amounts of public expenditure ultimately being transferred for a foreign conflict, albeit one that is in Europe, while you're seeing winter fuel payments being cut for pensioners. Then they're going to make that calculation. They may consider that to be somewhat unfair.
Yeah, because, I mean, you can't, you know, literally, you know, tell me that it's raining while you're peeing down my back, as they once said in a Clint Eastwood film. And David Lammy is doing this exact thing where he's going, oh, well, you know, the thing is we didn't do a risk assessment on pensioners and how much harm that would do if we pulled the winter fuel allowance. They also haven't done a risk assessment on what happens if you give a load of money to Ukraine and they start World War III.
No, absolutely. And I think that another point to me is a discussion about overseas climate aid as well. I think in the region of 11.6 billion is the pledge as well. So I think that people are saying if they see all this money being used for overseas purposes, whether it's foreign conflicts or climate assistance, while we're making cuts to winter fuel payments for British pensioners, then I think they're going to consider that.
Well, I spotted a very interesting story yesterday, which kind of gives the reasoning, I suppose, if you like, to Ed Miliband's mad net zero crusade. And what it is that, you know, the Labour Party gathered loads and loads of money, millions and millions of pounds in donations from green groups, including Ecotricity, which is Dale Vince's company, including a couple of think tanks, which are all about, you know, climate change. And because they've got so much money from these people, they obviously have to do what they want.
No, absolutely. And I think we should value environmental protection and sustainability, but it can't be done in a radical way.
No.
And I think that the problem is this government has talked a great deal about economic growth, being a mission-driven government to get the British economy back on its feet. But I think that with net zero radicalism, that works exactly against those very objectives.
Yeah, exactly right. Let's talk about this lack of risk assessment, because they've also got themselves into a bit of a mess over this black hole, haven't they? Because yesterday we revealed on this very show that the Financial Times had asked for the government and the Treasury specifically to say exactly what this black hole was all about. Give us some details on how this black hole has been created, what is the reason for it, and what exactly is the cost of it. And the Treasury said, well, we're sorry, we can't give you the details because we actually haven't worked out whether or not the figures are accurate. So again, you're kind of going, so you keep banging on about this £22 billion black hole, and it now turns out it might not actually be there.
Well, it's a lack of transparency, isn't it? And I think that's a very serious problem which feeds into our crisis in governance more generally. And I think a big point to make, Mike, the Labour government, it's absolutely within its right to explain which parts of the economy need to be repaired, how they want to reform the UK economy. But I think to talk constantly about this £22 billion black hole, I think that Andy Haldane, the former Bank of England chief, he said that ultimately what it's doing, it's harming business confidence.
Absolutely.
It's harming consumer confidence as well. And I think that he said that ultimately it might even be a problem in terms of attracting foreign direct investment into UK PLC.
Right.
So I think that you need to be careful and you have to strike the right balance. You can talk about the problems in our economy, but if you ultimately talk about it to this extent, the problems of this so-called black hole, then actually you might be hurting the UK economy.
But when you talk about the problems of this economy as well, also put it in perspective, because I was reading yesterday evening that Germany's about to go into recession. You know, Germany has got massive problems economically, as has France, as has Spain, as has every other country in the European Union. Britain alone is the best performing economy in the G7. So, you know, they've got nothing to complain about in terms of what they've inherited, and they should be talking Britain up instead of talking it down.
Absolutely. I think that, as I said, you have to strike the right balance, and I think in some ways when you make those international comparisons, the UK economy is not faring too badly. And I think you talk about Germany there. What was very interesting, what you saw in the recent state elections in eastern parts of Germany, the Alternative for Deutschland performing particularly well. That's largely because since reunification, they haven't been able to integrate those eastern parts of Germany very well into the national economy, and I think that's a big problem for the German economy more generally.
Absolutely right. And I found this story finally. Labour raised £26 million in the run-up to the general election. It's in the Times, more than 50% more than the Tories, thanks in part to big donations from green backers. They received £4 million from a company called Quadrature Capital, which is a hedge fund, which said the donation was intended to support policies that will deliver climate change. Quadrature Capital is pledged to give $325 million a year to combat climate change. The company's 113 staff are paid an average of £3 million each. So these are champagne socialists, make no mistake. Labour also received £2 million from Dale Vince from Ecotricity. £2 million quid.
And I think that
he should spend more on his haircut.
And I think that will very much heighten the public perception that Labour's not only enthralled to trade union militants, but also eco-radicals as well. I think that will question the Labour Party in terms of how it's able to govern the country if it's very much beholden to those what I'd consider to be radical sectoral interests.
Yeah, absolutely right. Now, it's Friday, and I know that we've had a pretty rough old week. There's been some pretty bad news out there for one and all. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to cheer you all up with a bunch of gaffes from this week. All sorts of people on the station, whether it's presenters, whether it's guests, whether it's even people outside of Talk TV. We're going to cheer you up with mistakes. Here's Ian Collins to kick us off.
Somebody said to me years ago it's very easy to fall between the cracks, and it really is. I think my dad fell between the cracks. Now, this was under a Labour government, so when things were meant to be hunky-dory and everything was going fantastic, I think he was a victim of falling through the cracks. Certainly gave us that a few times. The cracks from time to time.
What is it, craps, claps, cracks? Come on, Ian.